Thanks for joining us today. We're going to spend the next hour discussing the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. From here on out, I will be referring to that as the EPBD. And I guess the significance of doing it this week is that it's World Green Building Week. The IGBC are having have a number of events on throughout the week. So do check their website out for their events calendar for this week. There's lots of practical events and tours and things like that for the built environment. So a little bit about Goodbody Clearstream. We're a subsidiary of Goodbody Financial Services. We're a sustainability consultancy and we've been around since 2009. We work with a large number of clients over a large number of sectors. And my name is Katie Heston, and I am the construction and real estate lead at Goodbody Clearstream. I'm also Director of Nature and Responsible Business. And I'm joined by my colleague, amongst pre-compliance and ESG reporting. As I said, we work with a large number of sectors, but our largest sector and our fastest growing would be the construction and real estate sector. The level of in this series, the type of work that we do ranges from carbon footprinting, decarbonisation, understanding the costs and attaining a chosen target. We calculate LCAs, we calculate EPDs, we do responsible business or ESG strategies. We help companies implement them and make them meaningful. We work on biodiversity net gain projects with our clients in this space and nature strategy formation. We also work in the ESG reporting, and I guess the most prominent of that at the moment is the CSRD. So that leads us into doing a lot of double materialities. We do subcontractor and supplier engagement as part of our responsible sourcing work, and we also provide sustainability training, which ranges from at a corporate level to those kind of operational who are working on sites and might not have as much of an understanding of sustainability as those at the corporate level. We are a sustainability training partner with the CIF in that regard. A brief agenda. So momentarily I'll introduce you to our panel, and then we will get an overview of the EPBD by my colleague Colm. We'll then move into presentations from the industry speakers and a panel discussion, and then we'll have an audience Q&A. So as we are kind of going along, please put your questions in the chat. There should be a Q&A option for you, or just put them in the chat, and I'll be sure to try and get them answered throughout the panel discussion. I've introduced Colm as Senior Manager of Regulation and Reporting at Clearstream. Then we will hear from Ken Mulkerrins, who is Head of Sustainability at Kilsaran. Ken is going to speak to us about EPDs and all the work that Kilsaran have done in creating environmental product declarations, which is positioning them well for the EPBD. I'll do my best to not confuse those two as we move on. We'll hear from David McKenna, who is a Sustainability Manager at John Paul. And David is going to speak to us about that interesting position that the contractor is in the building value chain. So they're sitting between the client and the subcontractors, and the work that John Paul are doing in this regard in relation to the EPBD. And then finally, we'll hear from Garrett Dorian, Director of Operations at IRES. And so IRES are Ireland's largest landlord, and Garrett is going to tell us all about the easy job that he has in decarbonising an existing building stock. Colm, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. So to set some context before we get into it today, I said I would go through some of the key figures that accompany the release of the EPBD in 2024 by the EU Commission. So 40% of the EU's energy consumption comes from buildings. 36% of the carbon emissions in the EU are also emitted from buildings, so a significant proportion of it. 85% and above of EU buildings were built before 2000, and 75%, three-quarters of buildings are labelled as poor energy performance. So it's against this backdrop that the revised EPBD was introduced in 2024. So the aim of the EPBD is to achieve a zero-emission building stock in the EU by 2050. So this ambition is to be achieved through increasing the rate of building renovations, through reducing energy consumption, and through promoting the uptake of renewable energy in buildings. So in terms of timelines, it was 28th of May 2024 when this was brought in through the EU, and this will be transposed, or must be transposed by a deadline of 29th of May 2026. So in terms of the scope and who is impacted by the EPBD, the scope is broad. It goes across the entire building value chain, from initial materials to the long-term ownership of buildings. So as you can see here, construction materials producers will need to ensure that their products meet stricter performance standards. For contractors, so those involved in the construction process, will need to comply with new energy and emissions requirements. Developers will have to plan projects around life cycle emissions and zero emission standards. And of course, the owners of the property who will ultimately be responsible for operating buildings that meet the EPBD's introduced requirements. So moving on to the updates in the EPBD, one of the most significant is LCAs, or life cycle carbon emission assessments. So this means for companies that they will have to measure the total environmental impact of a building through its entire life cycle, from construction through use and ultimately to demolition or reuse of the building. Previously, under previous iterations of the EPBD, this was a nice to have or optional, and now it's a must have. So the LCAs are moving from best practice to mandatory compliance. So from the 1st of January 2028, the LCAs will be required for buildings over 1,000 meters squared. So roughly this would apply to apartments or commercial developments. And then from the 1st of January 2030, this requirement extends to all buildings, regardless of size. So in practice, developers and owners will need to integrate LCAs into your planning and reporting processes in advance of these deadlines. Moving on to zero emissions buildings. So another key change is this updated building standard. So since 2020, all new buildings in the EU were required to be nearly zero energy buildings. This updated or revised directive goes further with this concept of ZEBs, or zero emission buildings. So ZEBs these are buildings designed with very high energy efficiency, requiring zero or minimal energy to operate, and crucially generating no on-site carbon emissions from fossil fuels. So an extremely ambitious target. The compliance for this is phased in. So from the 1st of January 2028, all new buildings owned by public bodies must meet this criteria. And then from the 1st of January 2030, all other new buildings must meet the same standard. So this shift, I suppose, in a nutshell, highlights the EU's ambition. It's not just about reducing energy demand, but the ambition is to remove fossil fuel emissions from new construction altogether. So it's a big shift and a big lift as opposed to the industry norm. And trying to cut out fossil fuels and diesel use on sites will be difficult in practice. Moving on to the minimum energy performance requirements. So looking at how the EPBD addresses energy performance. Firstly, I suppose in order to understand this slide, there's a lot of content in it. The EPBD distinguishes between residential and non-residential buildings. In terms of mixed-use buildings, then, the EPBD leaves discretion to member states or countries. So Ireland will have discretion to decide how they determine or distinguish a building. But industry guidance, so at the bottom of your slide there, such as from the World Green Building Council, suggests that at least 50% be the distinguishing factor. So essentially, if a building is 51% residential, it should be categorized as such. Again, we'll know more once Ireland publishes some documentation related to this. But on the top line there, for commercial or non-residential buildings, each member state is required under the EPBD to identify its lowest performing buildings and to bring them up to a minimum standard. So there are clear milestones set by the directive. So by 2030, the lowest performing 16% of buildings must be renovated or improved. So this will look like in practice BER-G and most likely some BER-F rated buildings as well will fall into this category. By 2033, this requirement will be extended to the lowest 26%. So BER-E or BER-D rated buildings might fall into this category as well. And then the pathway to 2050. So every 5 years, countries will be required to report a plan to the EU and how they plan to upgrade their building stock. So Currently, Ireland are required to publish or submit this first draft by the 31st of December this year, with the final version due on the 31st of December 2026. So this will set out, I suppose, the plan of renovation policies, funding, what the minimum energy performance standards for non-residential buildings will look like, but also for residential buildings, the renovation trajectory. So it'll be a very insightful document, which we are looking forward to reviewing, as I'm sure a lot of people on this call will be too. So beyond those first targets as well, Ireland has to establish a long-term timeline, so 5 years, 10 years, out to 2040 and then 2050, a strategy to ensure that non-residential buildings are progressively renovated with a view to achieving zero emissions by 2050. So moving on to the residential sector at the bottom of the slide, EPBD treats them a little bit differently to the commercial side of things. So instead of targeting specific buildings, the directive sets an average energy use reduction. And this targets the whole national housing stock. So a 16% reduction in average energy use by 2030 and a 20 to 22% reduction by 2035. Again, this will require comparison to a baseline, which is set for 2020 of energy emissions from Ireland's housing stock. And in addition, at least 55% of that decrease must be achieved through the renovation of 43% of Ireland's worst performing residential buildings from an energy perspective. So what that means in practice is it's a big shift from previous legislation, because strategically for both categories of buildings, there must be a focus on the worst performing parts of the building stock first. So trying to improve the market from the bottom up, and also a requirement for countries to set a path to compliance over the next 25 years. So really a lot to digest there. So moving on then, finally, what will companies have to do to ensure compliance with the EPBD, the takeaways? Firstly, calculating life cycle analysis for buildings. So like I mentioned earlier on, they're no longer optional, they're mandatory. So companies will need to measure and report the entire carbon footprint of a building from construction through to demolition or reuse. These LCAs will also inform EPDs, or environmental product declarations. So a data-driven approach to building design and management will be required. Secondly, retrofitting. EPBD is very clear that a significant share of emissions reductions must come from upgrading existing buildings. Certainly a challenge, but it's also a massive opportunity for the construction and real estate sector. Actions such as improving insulation, replacing fossil fuel systems, and modernizing older buildings. There's a huge scope potential for business there. And this is where much of the challenge and opportunity lies in the EPBD, because the majority of building stock, both now that exists now, will exist in 2050. So they're already there in existence, and that's the same across the EU. Finally, adapting future fit technologies to meet the zero emissions building standards. Again, a challenge, but also an opportunity to embrace high efficiency and zero emission technologies that help companies to align with that. This can mean new building materials, smart energy systems, renewable energy integration, and again, insulating solutions. So to summarize my few slides here, the EPBD is an extremely ambitious piece of legislation. It's here to stay. We'll have a better idea of what that looks like in Ireland once this draft plan is published at the end of December. But for now, it's certainly an interesting piece of legislation that will provide plenty of food for thought over the next few months and years.
Moving on, we'll now hear from Ken. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Katie. So hello, everyone. Just to reiterate again, sorry, my name is Ken Mulkerrins, and I'm the Group Head of Sustainability and Innovation for Kilsaran. Many thanks to Katie and Goodbody Clearstream for the invite to speak today. I'm briefly going to discuss today the impact of the EPBD on construction material manufacturers like ourselves, and the role that EPDs have to play in this space. The next slide there, Katie. So when we looked at the EPBD and what it was going to impact and how it was going to impact us as a manufacturer, I suppose there was three key parts of the recast that were of significance to us. Article 7, I suppose paragraph 2 and paragraph 5, with the member states having to ensure that the life cycle GWP is calculated. And then that the other in Annex 3, it gave out the guidance on how that GWP had to be calculated. So I suppose it set out a little bit of a roadmap for us. So when we look at and to kind of as a manufacturer to look at it in an overall holistic approach and to understand it, we looked and we went to EN 15643, which has a handy illustration in the document itself, and it shows the different levels of the framework and the different sustainability standards that are within. And it very quickly became evident to us that the product level and the EN 15804 specifically related to us as a product manufacturer, and how we were going to have to look at our products and have a look at EPDs and the role that they play in this space. So when we look at whole life carbon and the LCA for the building, obviously we look at upfront carbon as a manufacturer of a product, and we can see that A1 to A3, there's a huge amount in there. But not only that, when we delve into it a little bit further and we look at A5 construction, we can see that new technologies such as modern methods of construction, precast, and so on and so forth, they can very much speed up the case of construction and therefore lower emissions. And on from that, then if we look at B1 and 2, they can obviously be influenced by selecting durable products with notable longevity. So in the case of the product selection from the very get-go, we're not just looking at upfront carbon. We can see that it influences by product choice, it influences the whole life cycle carbon assessment all the way through the B and C modules. Now, us as manufacturers, when we look at challenges with EPDs, we still get the daily emails in from people that are looking for EPDs, but they don't really understand what they're looking for or how to read an EPD. All they know is that they need to have some type of documentation on file. So that can be a challenge for manufacturers like ourselves, and we know from some of our other people in this space that they're getting the same. The second, I suppose, would be unrealistic expectations. We do very often get calls and emails from people that say they want EPDs for all of our products within all of our product categories across the entire group. And to put that into some type of context, if we just took our ready mix concrete side of the business, each of our manufacturing plants could have thousands of different ready mix concrete products, and we'll get the emails or we'll get the calls saying looking for an EPD for each and every product. And when you take that into perspective, you could end up with tens of thousands of different EPDs as a manufacturer, which obviously is not feasible. Then another one for us, and I suppose for SMEs, would be the cost. So when we're looking at LCA calculations and when we're looking at EPD publications, you're looking at about 1,500 quid per minimum per LCA and EPD to be published. And again, if you have clients or people with unrealistic expectations looking for hundreds of different EPDs for different products, whether it be concrete, whether it be timber, whether it be, blocks or mortars or screeds, we just have to try and manage them expectations, because obviously the costs will keep on rising with the number of EPDs that have to be published at a given time. And then lastly, when we looked at challenges, one that comes up quite frequently is the changes in methodologies or rules. So when we look at the rules, as you know, each product will have a PCR or a product category rule. And in addition to that, you can have complementary product category rules. And there can be changes in data set points and so on and so forth. And if I was to give an example of this, the asphalt side of things in the construction industry, when you look at all our road networks that have to be updated, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, the TII, have changed the rules there quite a bit and quite a number of times, even down to how products are categorized. Data set points for the likes of bitumen have all been changed. So we would have numerous amount of EPDs that would have been published, and we would have paid to have them published. But now, since the new rules came in, even though them EPDs might be only a couple of months old, they all have to be redone again and recalculated with new LCAs and then new verified EPDs. So obviously there's a cost, and there'll be a cost to small and medium businesses there also. But I suppose lastly, it's not all bad news. More and more we're seeing that there's industry-wide and representative bodies publishing EPDs. It's a generic EPD, so to speak. The likes of the Cement Manufacturers Ireland will have EPDs for their cement products that people can use when they're looking at carbon footprinting. And the likes of the Irish Concrete Federation have recently published 6 different concrete EPDs. And where we see this can help is that if we have some form of a defined set of EPDs per product type, then manufacturers like ourselves will know what the clients and the customers are looking for, and we can invest and we can get them EPDs done, rather than the likes of clients and developers and architects and engineers giving unrealistic demands to look for multiple different EPDs for multiple different products. If we can have a set range, it kind of narrows things down a bit, and then everybody will know what we need to do. So in conclusion, I suppose the EPDs have a huge role to play in the EPBD, but we do need to manage expectations, and we do need to look at the costs for small and medium enterprises on the publishing and the verifying of these EPDs, and then the associated costs with any methodology changes or rules that might come in the future.
Yeah, I agree, Ken. There's a lot of effort goes into calculating an EPD, and if you think SMEs might not even have a footprint done at an organisational level, so the bar is high with the EPD calculation. Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much, Ken. That's great. David, we might hear a little bit about life as a contractor in relation to the EPBD.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katie and Ken and Colin. So myself, David McKenna, Sustainability Manager for John Paul Construction. I'm in the privileged position of being in a contractor organisation, and we're in between the developers, clients, and the likes of Ken and the construction materials companies, as well as the subcontractors. I'll just give you a next slide there, Katie, and I'll give you a bit more detail just to give you the context of John Paul Construction and our business. We're a long time in business. We've delivered thousands of projects, and well over 600 staff ourselves. But for every one John Paul staff, there's about 5 subcontractor workforce staff on all our job working across our jobs. So we're in Ireland, UK, Europe, and just to give you another insight into our kind of supply chain, most of the materials that get brought to our projects are through our subcontractors. So about maybe 70 to 80% of our spending is done with our subcontractors. We only purchase about 10% of our 15% of our spend is directly with material suppliers ourselves. So that's just to give you a context, because I'm going to describe a bit how we need to really carefully embed carbon management into our own procurement system, and cascade down from the requirements of our clients, our developers and clients, down to our subcontractors, as well as the material suppliers that we buy, but especially down to our subcontractors. I'll just quickly list off the challenges and then get into some of the approaches we're taking to make sure we manage it properly. I suppose the stricter standards are coming. We all know that. We've been grappling with it for a while. Skills shortages. The industry is always has trouble with availability of skilled workforce, especially as new technologies start coming to the fore. Lower carbon materials, there's a lot more options available, but sometimes there can be limited availability of the best option as well, and you need to work with your clients and design teams to identify it, and your supply chain, of course, to identify the best options. Fragmented supply chains, this is the big one. I suppose getting everybody aligned and harmoniously thinking on the same page. Cost pressures, always an issue. And scaling up retrofits. That's another part that we have to get stuck into. I think Colin mentioned it about how there's going to be a focus on getting the worst performing buildings up to par over the next few years. Just the rest of the slide is just for illustration, but while typically the buildings account for about 37 to 40%, depends on how you read it, of the emissions in the Irish context. About 1/3 is from embodied carbon, and 2/3 of that is from operational carbon. While the percentages might not change too much with the EPBD, hopefully the absolute value will come down, and even the contribution, maybe the net kind of contribution of buildings to the Irish greenhouse gas emissions might even drop a bit. So I'll just go to the next slide and I'll discuss my last slide. It's a bit busy, but I'll just discuss about the approach we're taking. I think that's the key one really as a contractor. Obviously, I just have an extract there from the Irish Green Building Council's Building a Zero Carbon Ireland roadmap, which John Paul signed up to. You can see the different role to play for different parties, including the construction industry, where we sit, and we can talk about that in a minute. But from our point as a contractor, we're obviously doing what we can to tackle on-site carbon reduction from construction activities, and that involves also working with our supply chain to make sure that any requirements that we've cascaded down from the project requirements, it also filter down to be delivered by our subcontractors and so on. So we've made a big effort on improving our energy and our sustainable practices on site and source of materials and so on. Streamlined sustainability data capture. This is a big area because up to now, I think even touching on what Ken was mentioning, a lot of carbon related information for embodied carbon or especially construction activity is based on kind of very rough estimates and maybe benchmarks from other regions. So getting the right sustainability data capture from EPDs down to doing a life cycle assessment and involving everyone in that process is very important. So embedding the carbon management framework across projects, and I mentioned here the PAS 2080, which is the kind of de facto carbon standard for construction and buildings. That's a key one for us, and it kind of ties in with how do we embed carbon KPIs across project briefs and delivery plans, and how do we prioritize low carbon design and modern methods of construction and so on. And then the last one is engaging with the supply chain and the designers and clients to make all that happen. Resourcing and upskilling all our site personnel. This is it's an ongoing area, not just the John Paul staff, but also the workers in our supply chain, and to find the lower carbon construction methods and the materials that are right for the job, and get the right information and handle it correctly. And then I'll get to the end of it, but it's get a seamless handover and integration across project levels. That means from the bid prep to the tendering to the delivery to the to the handover of the project, and obviously doing knowledge sharing, seeing what works and sharing it, being involved in different forums such as the Construction Industry Federation or the Irish Green Building Council, and so on, Supply Chain Sustainability School, getting involved in those and sharing the knowledge and getting, rising tide will raise all boats and make sure that that's how the construction industry is going to deal with this in the future. Yeah, no, I think that's all from me, Katie. If you've got any questions, happy to answer.
Absolutely, that's great, David. Yeah, we'll jump to the questions after we hear from Garrett, our next speaker. But thank you for that, David.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks to Goodbody Clearstream for the opportunity to give our lessons learned over the last number of years looking at this. Garrett, Dorian from IRES, maybe the next slide, Katie, please. We have a large portfolio of apartments and commercial space across Dublin. We're involved in 35 multi-unit developments, so a lot of energy to look at. Want to sort of it can get very complicated, I found, when I started looking at this over the last number of years. But I suppose the two of the questions I had to ask myself, and keep asking myself, why are you decarbonizing, what does it mean, and what's the targets that you're trying to attain? So it's getting back maybe to the asset level again and bringing it back down to basics. Next slide, please, Katie. So it's actually understanding the asset. So I had to get back down, actually, okay, what is the asset currently doing from an energy consumption, and actually how do we get all that data? Because for us, you're talking tens of thousands of data points collection every year. And you can spend money doing this, quite substantial amount of money, by setting up systems and IT systems. But we found for us that it actually just wasn't cost benefit analysis. It just wasn't working out. So we actually went back to our own staff, going out, taking pictures of ESB gas meters, putting it in Excel spreadsheets. Now that is changing. Because of the CRU, you have currently a process in place, and so if you are looking actually, and you have a portfolio like ourselves, the time and effort is phenomenal to do that, but you need to understand your asset outside a basic level before you start to decarbonizing it, because what you don't want to do is waste money doing something actually when some assets, even though the BERs might be looking reflectively good, you'll find that actually that sometimes the energy is not reflective of the BER, and vice versa. Okay, so what is the current heating and hot water systems like, and also the end of life of those? So what we've been trying to do is actually look at those and say, okay, well, when's our gas boilers due for replacement? What can we do? And then sort of put a holistic plan together over a number of years. So it wouldn't be a 2-year plan. You might have to plan 10, 15 years. And again, that leads into maybe the EPBD, where when is the fossil fuels out of the when you're not allowed to use them. So originally that was 2035, that now has moved to 2040. So again, you're sort of long-term planning as well as short-term planning. So there's a big understanding of that. And some of the elements there of that is the building passport. So when you're looking at multiple assets, trying to remember these things is obviously very difficult. And EPBD does reference a building passport, which is something that we were working on already. So where's your LED light bulbs being replaced, whether it be internally in apartments or whether it be in common areas. Again, where you have a district heating system, when's the age of the boilers up in that? How can we tie that into a new project? What I've just put there is one of the early energy reports there on that spreadsheet to the right. We did that one about 4 years ago, and it's when I was trying to get my head around how do we actually understand how to decarbonize. And the energy reports are good in one way, bad in another, because you could spend an absolute fortune doing reports. But it's actually trying to understand your assets. And once you start doing a few of these, you'll actually begin to understand your assets and what the impact of it is. So if you take just that basic one there, like putting a heat pump in instead of, electric systems, and the big increase there of 72%. But obviously, fabric first approach, you don't do that until you understand your fabric. And you'll pick these things up. Next slide, please, Kitty. So said, like, one of the first things we looked at actually when we were doing a trial was we actually looked at this 2 or 3 years ago, and we decided I'd done a number of the retrofitting courses, heat pump courses, just to get my head around actually what do you need to do here. We did a thermal analysis of a few apartments that were 30 years old, just to understand actually, are we going to get cold bridging? Will this one template fit all? And it doesn't. But it gives you a better understanding of that. What we didn't want to do, and what I particularly didn't want to do, is retrofit a few apartments on the trial. We end up with mold, which is one of the big problems that came from early retrofitting of units. And the other thing that came then was actually ventilation is critical. So you need to refresh the air when you're doing these, and understand the air permeability. Everything's tied in. We do use one of the one-stop shop contractors. One of the reasons you obviously get grants, and they understand it a bit better. But also then you do a pre-BER before you do it. So that also assisted us. From us, one of our other issues is the common area. So when you look at the common area in a multi-unit development, you've obviously got, we've probably 2 of the biggest car parks in Ireland that we're heavily involved in. One's in Tala, one's in Beacon South Water. So there's a phenomenal amount of electricity being used in those. And actually, so okay, if you're changing from from standard bulbs to LEDs, like you're looking at PV panels as well, what's payback periods. And we also have a number of district heating systems. We're looking at how can we maybe phase a retrofit of those projects out as well. So there's things that we're actually trying to put together a plan, and actually what is the impact of doing a project on the current energy consumption, and what's the cost of that. So again, it's all about understanding that. Next slide, Katie. We'll just go through some of the challenges, and I think both like the two lads I'm talking about earlier on there is actually when you go to, and I suppose a shout out to Irish Green Building Council, who were extremely helpful to me over the last sort of 5 years. There's lots of people within that organisation and shareholders like ourselves who you feed back what you've learned. And I think you go to these community of practice events, and there's so much happening, the legislation, you're looking at what's coming down the line, and sometimes you get bogged down in that. And actually I think it's actually taking a step back and get back to basics, understanding your asset. So I think one of the challenges for me is every time I went to something is, oh my God, this legislation is coming down, that's going to have an impact to the EPBD, you know, the circular economy, all these things that are impacting. You have to understand, okay, get back to actually what is the core thing that you're trying to do, and then actually try and work on that to start with. So I was actually bringing too much back at one point in time, and I had to actually roll back and say, okay, well, what do we need to focus on here? Because like decarbonizing can get very confusing, and understanding your targets can be confusing. So that was one of the things I learned. With decarbonizing and then the retrofits is planning and building regulations. If you're doing a retrofit apartment, which is already tight, maybe from a space point of view, you're now putting in an additional 4 inches or 100 mil, 150 mil of internal insulation. What's the impact of doing that? You know, you're impacting, you know, where wardrobes, bed sizes, all these things. You need to understand all these things. Heat pumps and balconies. Again, there's a bit of confusion actually about building planning regs and all that. Now we're putting a large commercial heat pump in one of our developments, and we're going through, like, we have to engage 10 consultants to get that. We're looking at BATs, we're looking at EIS, AA. So when you're looking at all these things, it's actually understanding the implications. That you just can't go out and put a large commercial heat pump in a multi-unit development. I've already mentioned the ventilation, common areas, talked about that already. The energy reports, any benefit? I would say yes, definitely is a benefit in them, but be careful that you're not getting bogged down on all the reports, because you need to sort of, for what we did was do a few trials, understand the impact of what you're doing, and then you can sort of you gain your knowledge. But I wouldn't go out, like, because we have 35 different developments, so would I go out and do 35 different energy reports in each one of them? No, because you could end up spending hundreds of thousands in energy reports for a few and get a good understanding. Working your way through it will help you. I was also part of one of the working groups lately for the guidelines from OMC and multi-unit developments. There's nothing out there at the minute. They're actually coming out, but it's actually, I'd say, get involved in things, because what you can do is put your point of view across and the challenges that you have found. And there's certainly lots of challenges, but you've lots of people will help you in actually understanding that. One of the big things that maybe people, as well as the grant process. So the SCAI, obviously there's grants out there and the government have lots of grants available, but the process can be challenging when you're actually trying to understand it from a business point of view. I know the SCAI, because I liaise them quite a bit, are actually trying to streamline that a bit. There are companies out there who deal with them on a daily basis, so maybe get involved with one of them as well, because they will cut through all the red tape and understanding of all that. And I think that was one of my big learning processes as well, was that SCA grant process. And there's certain things within that, like de minimis rules that would apply to us with European grants and all that. So that's a whistle-stop tour of my certain experience with the last number of years looking at the IRES portfolio.
That's great, Garrett. Thanks. I think a common theme from all the speakers is to come together with all your challenges and findings and learnings, and sharing how you're getting on. We have a couple of questions, but Garrett, I guess I might go to you first. You mentioned return on investment, and I think the return on investment of retrofitting for a landlord is an interesting perspective. Would you be able to discuss that a little bit more, or how did you find that?
Well, with the current rules that we would have to apply to, so obviously the rent is limited to 2% or less currently. So you do a 7-step upgrade, you can reset to market rent in the locality, based upon the current rents within that. And we have done that. We did a few trials last year, and we're working on a program to roll that out. Based upon the current rules, obviously that may change the government's new regs. But yeah, no, we would normally do that on turnover. So okay. Where somebody moves out, we might have, usually look at any of the apartments D, E, F, G scenario. And again, then we would do the design, and actually, yeah, we would do a full deep retrofit, not just from an energy point of view, but we'd normally just as well look at the bathrooms and kitchens, all of the above floors, and then we would reset that apartment for a circa 15 plus years then. That's the way we look at that. So your energy retrofit probably could be somewhere 40,000-50,000, but depending on then you could spend the same again from on a general apartment uplift. And so then you're basing that upon your rental uplift and actually trying to get, as long as it's going to take you to get that payback period. Is it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? So again, we have set parameters from our board that we would have to, apply to each one of those. So that's why we would normally look at that. And again, if you're looking at any of the businesses looking at PV panels, then it'd be a similar scenario. We would generally look at 15 kilowatt peak, could cost 20,000, and what your savings probably around 3,000 you may save on your electricity bills a year. Your carbon is the big one also, because you're reducing your carbon, your energy consumption. So again, we look at that as well. LEDs, PIRs, they're all the same type of scenario.
And determine feasibility through that. Yeah, it's an interesting approach. Colm, I might come to you. Would you be able to tell me, if I'm a business and I'm refusing or I fail to comply, what's the cost of that, or what may happen?
Yeah, so I suppose there's a few consequences for non-compliance. And the specifics, again, we'll see that there's quite a lot of discretion left by the EU to member states to, you're given a target to achieve, and it's up to you on how you want to implement or ensure those targets are implemented or achieved. But I suppose to bracket them off, the firstly will be regulatory penalties. So for non-compliance, there could be fines, delays in planning permission for developments. One measure that was, I suppose, suggested by the EU in an advisory package that they published at the end of June was, a block or a veto where if a building was non-compliant, the sale or lease or again planning permission or upgrade of a building would be blocked until it was compliant. So that would be I suppose one potential consequence.
So you can't sell unless you bring it up to the specs outlined in the EPBD, is that?
Yeah, so again, that's a suggested measure.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean that Ireland will adopt that or implement that, but it's potential. Another one would be market competitiveness. So another suggested proposal was the maintenance of a register of compliant and non-compliant buildings, both nationally and across the EU. So a non-compliant building could lose value quickly if investors or purchasers or tenants are keen to I suppose put their business towards compliant buildings or zero emission properties. And I suppose that's the risk of a stranded asset, I suppose, where the building is unable to be moved on because they don't meet the standards. And then thirdly, I suppose it's here already, but the operational costs. So an energy inefficient building is obviously going to cost more to run for energy and maintenance.
Okay, great, thank you. David, I might ask you a question. Are the subcontractors you're engaging with aware of this? Are they aware of the requirements that might be kind of posed to them? Is this something in your responsible sourcing work? Is this something you're talking about with them? Do they already know?
Yeah, it's obviously varies. Level of companies we're dealing with. And some of them would be just as aware as we are. And that'll range right down to some that have probably not heard of it at all. But in terms of how we're engaging with them, like I said, we're in a position between the developer, the client's organization, and the supply chain to deliver the building. So, it helps for us to deal with our suppliers by maybe pre-qualification and having our supply chain code of conduct. So we flag that these are important to us and that we ask them all to acknowledge and share information, but also
let them know early. Yeah.
And also then, when we're dealing with our clients as well, we try and get involved if we can, such as what we're doing with Hibernia Real Estate Group for early contractor involvement with several groups now, especially one upcoming project at Clonwilliam Quarter where we get involved early and bring in the knowledge from our supply chain to incorporate that with the designers of the building and, get a proper planning and look for options for lower carbon materials and so on. That's a great opportunity. But also then we cascade that down to the project-specific requirements, and give trackers, templates for people to provide the information that we require and educate them on how to fill it in and so on. So it's a hands-on role, a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a big responsibility. Ken, I might ask you. I know from, say, our experience in working with our clients and calculating EPDs, there's a number of clients who have them and aren't publishing them and might just be hanging on for a customer request for this. Are you seeing a demand in the your customer base asking for EPDs?
Yeah, it's definitely grown. For sure. But again, I suppose for every kind of inquiry that we'll get, I would say half of them are for people just to have on file, and they don't know what it is or how to read it or how to incorporate it into their whole building and to look at their whole building carbon footprint. But definitely it is growing, and we do see people on more and more looking for them, and that kind of goes both ways with us as well from our suppliers. Kind of like what David was alluding to there, we find ourselves a lot. Our big suppliers, our kind of tier 1 suppliers, would be well versed on this and would have an awful lot of information for us to populate our LCAs. But there are smaller suppliers that just this is not on their radar, and they don't have either the resources in finance or the resources in personnel to work through this. So we end up trying to coach them and get them through so we can get the data that we need. But is EPD inquiries on the increase? I would say yes. But I would say if you were to put a percentage on it, I'd say 50% of them are being asked for the proper reasons, and 50% of them are being asked just to have something on file to tick a box.
Tick. Just going back to the coaching that you were saying with your supply chain, what does that look like? Are you advising them on carbon footprinting, or is it how to read an EPD, or?
It's nearly all of the above, to be honest, Katie. Again, like what David was saying, we would have purchasing procedures and we would have pre-quals. Everything down from getting down into the micro details. If they have 14,001, if they have 50,001 energy management systems, and looking for carbon footprints of their products that they're supplying to us. So in a lot of cases, the tier 1 suppliers would have an awful lot of data that they can share with us, whether it's published EPDs or whether it's unverified calculations. But in a lot of cases, the smaller people, just to be quite frank, don't know and don't understand it. So we need to try and do it for them. And I myself would spend a lot of time meeting with suppliers, talking with suppliers, and kind of guiding them through that so that we can get more meaningful data to put into our LCA.
Resource intensive, I can imagine.
Yes, for sure. Absolutely.
Colm, I might come back to just a word that most people on the call will have heard, omnibus. So we're kind of all up in the air here in the world of ESG. Do you think the EPBD is going to change again? Any kind of notion of it in the omnibus?
Yes, obviously there's a lot of discussion on political change and so on, and watering down of environmental regulations and so on. The omnibus, I suppose, in short, no, the EPBD wasn't part of the omnibus package at the end of February. So no on that front. In terms of the legislation or regulation being amended, there hasn't been any indication for the EPBD that will happen. Again, we'll see how Ireland transposes it, but as recently as I think the 30th of June, the end of June this year, so about 8 or 9 weeks ago, the EU published this package, a support package for EU countries, basically advising on different ways of implementing this legislation. And there was no reference to amendments in that. So as it stands, full steam ahead.
We won't all be sitting here with whiplash in a month's time from hard changes to the EPBD then. So I'll put these questions out there for the panelists to give me a response to. Will LCAs be required for all buildings or just all new buildings, including existing stock? So is it just the LCA requirement? I think, Colin, maybe this is for you, on a new buildings or all buildings from the dates that you mentioned?
Yeah, so in legislation, it's just new buildings. It's referred to in
Okay.
the directive as global warming life cycle global warming potential, or GWP. It's only referring to new buildings, but there has been, I suppose, commentary and discussion politically about that member states or our European countries could, I suppose, transfer that to existing buildings too, but it's not mandated by the directive. It would be subject to the country's discretion.
Okay, yeah, that would be a difficult challenge, I guess, in LCA on something that was built a number of years ago. Next question. So what's the panel's view on what changes are required to get commercial buildings, particularly urban high-rise with little roof space, from our current Part L requirements to net zero? Are they fabric measures or technologies? Do we think they exist?
Yeah, I'd take that one, Katie.
Sure.
To be honest, I think it's a combination of all. I don't think there's going to be one silver bullet. I think in terms of the fabric, when we look at high rise, we obviously would look towards insulation, stuff like that, to bring down operational emissions. The superstructure itself, if we're looking at the materials going in, I suppose we'd look at the correct specification of that and not over specifying of materials with greater carbon footprints than is required. And then I suppose from a technology point of view, definitely when we talk about heating systems and so on and so forth, I think that will definitely play a role. But again, I don't think it's a silver bullet. I think it'll be a combination of all.
Okay, great, Ken. Thank you.
I think, Kitty, that'd be the same for us for the resi buildings, like where you've your multi-unit developments. It's a challenge, and honestly, it's a challenge from a financial point of view as well. Putting heat pumps. I know there's another query in there, but heat pumps on roofs as well. Like, so we have looked at designs on some of our multi-unit developments, but doing something similar and how we're going to reduce it. But some countries where their facade is like, maybe in some of the Eastern European countries are able to upgrade their facade externally fairly easily. And I'm assuming the same for commercial. It's not just as easily here completed from a commercial and a resi point of view. So I think there's probably a lot more technology to come, I'm assuming. Like, I'm even looking at some of the stuff where you have balconies where like our PV panels and that's, you can see that's happening in other parts of Europe. There's so much technology out there. It's actually understanding the impact of that. But again, potentially it's all going to come down to costs, I would have thought, and actually potential grants of government and how they're going to drive it as well from probably a public sector first of all, and then we'll probably all tail in the back of that potentially as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Garrett, a question specifically for you. So public funding on fossil fuel boilers is or has ceased. How are IRES preparing to transition your building stock away from gas boilers?
Well, we don't get any public funding anyway, but I suppose it's coming back to probably what I was saying earlier on there, is that although we're doing retrofits, we're also doing some trials of some of our apartments as well. Looking at the fabric, doing air tightness permeability tests, and actually putting heat pumps just in to see actually how to perform. Like, some of these are C and D BER rated units, but when you do your permeability tests, they're actually performing quite well. Buildings that were built in the 05, 010 or 2010 era. I know there can be bad vibes out there, but those buildings, but from a quality, we have found actually that they're actually quite good from that perspective. But again, it's actually understanding. So hence why we do some trials. We put heat pumps in to see how to perform. We look at the data pre the heat pump, whether right with all electric or whatever gas boiler scenario, and actually see how that performs post as well. So that's what we're doing. But we've also done designs on multi-unit developments as well with the heat pump and them on the roof scenario, just figure out actually can this work as well. If you take individual gas boilers out, the multi-unit development sort of guidelines should actually assist, because they're talking about larger detailed sort of energy reports. Currently you get an energy report and it's quite minimal. It's more or less the same as your BER report for a house. So I think that'll evolve hopefully again, about because fossil fuels actually obviously is 2040, but I think everybody sort of needs to plan now and looking at life cycle again. That's sort of what we're planning to do.
Okay. trial and error and R&D.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
I think that's where it's coming. You need everybody to understand, and where people share information, we can all learn from what other people are doing.
Yeah, it's a key theme from what everybody has been saying today. I guess we're at time now for our lunchtime session. But thanks to all the speakers and the audience for your questions and for your time and slides. And if there are any kind of pressing questions, or you feel like you want to reach out after this, there's 2 email addresses on screen, and please do reach out. We'll be circulating slides and a recording after this also. Thanks all.